Today, I'm going to be answering a question from Toby, who is a PhD student in the UK. Her question reads, how does one move from reading and making notes to writing drafts either for a paper or thesis? Sometimes we just have notes of reading, and how to piece them together in a creative and critical write-up is a challenge. So I think the most important thing here would be to make it clear that there's usually a big difference between an academic article and a thesis or dissertation. Especially in the UK system, my understanding is that the dissertations are usually something that's going to need substantial work before they can be developed into a paper. So to keep this simple, I'm going to answer this question along the lines of someone who's writing a dissertation. And I'm going to address the question then of how you put together a literature review based on what you have written. I've already made a video on introductions, and I think the fundamentals that I discussed there are also relevant here. I'm going to link that up in the description so that you can watch that as well later. So I'll discuss 4 key things that you need to take into account when you write your literature review. The first relates to the content, what needs to be in there. And then there's some key considerations that you need to make that are going to affect the remaining 2 things, which is what a good literature review is supposed to look like and what the structure your literature review is going to take. First, we discuss the content. This is the most straightforward thing to present. You are taking a critical look at the state of the art. So what is the current knowledge about the particular topic that you are interested in? And how far have we come in terms of advancement of knowledge up to this point? And what are the remaining gaps that need to be addressed or shortcomings that need to be addressed in order for further advancement of knowledge within that particular field? Second, what sort of key considerations then do you need to make in order to be able to have a good overview that covers these elements? I think there would be 3 important ones. The first one relates to novelty. So how new is the topic that you are exploring? And you can look at this in terms of the context. So sometimes you can be looking at an idea that is already well advanced in general, but has been underexplored in a particular context. So the novelty can be contextual or it can be theoretical. The second issue relates to the knowledge base on which that is available for the work that you would like to do. This can also be empirical or theoretical. So in certain fields, you can find that there's a particular topic that has been well explored at a theoretical level, but there isn't an empirical evidence that allows us to test the theories that have been put forward. Sometimes it can be a mix of both. That also has an implication for how extensive your literature review is going to be. And then the third one relates to the diversity of your audience. So especially as interdisciplinary research becomes important, you have to be mindful of who the readership is going to be. And this is going to affect, for example, how much time you spend on unpacking or introducing concepts. So if the audience is not that diverse and they are well-versed with the issues that you are addressing, then you need to spend less time unpacking and introducing concepts. But if they will be diverse and know certain things and not others, then you have the challenge of striking a balance between essentially not treating them as dumb, but also making information that could be useful for the people who are not familiar with those aspects of the topic that you are covering. So having thought about these considerations, we look at the literature review. What makes a good literature review outside of the contents and the key considerations that we have discussed? So the first one relates to the key concepts. So if there are key concepts that you're using or key variables that you're using, these have to be clearly introduced and they have to be defined. So the extent to which you will spend time offering these definitions or introducing them, as I already said, is going to depend on the several aspects that I mentioned under key considerations. A good literature review also is well synthesized. And what we mean by this is that, let's say you have read 60 different articles on the key topic that you're interested in. A synthesized literature review is going to provide an overview that already cuts across these 60 articles. So imagine, for example, that you had a matrix where you had your key variables or concepts on one side and you had the different papers that you have read on the other. A synthesized literature review will be able to say, for example, articles 5, 9, and 10 say the same thing about this particular concept, whereas articles 1 to 8 also say the same thing, but they are different from the other articles. And so when you synthesize this, one of the natural things that happens is that you have less problems with paraphrasing. You will notice that you do not need to rely on AI to paraphrase the text, because you have to summarize what 2, 3, or even more articles are essentially saying, but you put in different words. So you put it in your own words and you have to show that these comes from the different sources. So once you master synthesis, you are less stressed about, for example, plagiarism, because you have to phrase it in your own way and you do not have to rely on AI tools to paraphrase it for you, because that shows that you have understood it. And the synthesis is more than just saying, here is what all the articles are saying the same, but it's also a way of contrasting what the different views in these articles are. And you can also synthesize. You have to make sure that this synthesis is holistic. As I already said, it covers all the articles rather than giving a summary for each individual article, because then it becomes very difficult to understand and it becomes very difficult to see the cluster of ideas that you are presenting throughout your section. A good literature review is also critical, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with, because we tend to see more descriptive literature reviews that simply say, oh, here is an overview of what we know from the literature. But a critical literature review then goes on to poke holes in this overview, try to show what sort of inconsistencies exist. So, for example, are there gaps that exist that have not been addressed in this literature? Are there problems maybe in the assumptions that are being made throughout time that could have affected the extent to which we can know knowledge? And sometimes I would also use this moment to also think about the methodology that is adopted across the different articles and question whether there could be methodological limitations that could have an implication on what we know. So a good literature review is more than just a display of what is out there, but it also goes on to poke holes in the current knowledge and show the shortcomings of the current knowledge, leading to what will be your contribution ultimately in the end. So you need to show the so what of it. So this is what the literature shows us. So what? What are the issues there that we need to be thinking about, that we need to be addressing in order to advance knowledge in the field? That's what it will do. And then a final element in terms of a good literature review is that it brings together the key concepts. So I've mentioned that you have to actually define the key concepts, but you also have to spend some time exploring the relationships between these concepts. So if you will do a quantitative paper, for example, this will usually be the hypothesis, where you hypothesize what sort of relationships exist between these key variables. But if it's qualitative work, usually you do your best speculation of what the relationship could be, or that there should at least be a relationship that you're going to explore and show why it will be important to understand the nature of this relationship. The fourth critical thing to think about in terms of your literature review is the structure. So this one is really difficult because it depends on a lot of things. So for example, if you are doing research where you are working with well-established theories, but the context is relatively new, you will usually want to spend at least the first section of your literature review introducing this context, showing the ways in which it is different from what is already familiar, and showing why these differences are worth exploring or taking a look at through the established lenses that we already use within a particular field. And then once you have done this, you can go on to structure your literature review. I think what I've seen to work usually well is to think about your key concepts of variables and what sort of relationships you want to explore within that. So if you structure your literature review according to the key variables and you spend a bit of time discussing or unpacking them, leading to a final section where you try to bring these concepts of variables together, usually linked to a particular theory, works very well, because it also helps your readers to cognitively start processing what sort of key issues you are working with, and they can start to see how you're building up your ideas leading to some kind of methodology that you are going to apply. So to summarize, if you are writing a literature review, moving from the notes that you have in terms of what you have read from the literature leading to a good literature review section, you have to always make sure that, first of all, in terms of contents, you do address these three main things. What do we currently know about the particular issue? How far have we come as a field, for example, in terms of understanding this issue, and how much further do we need to go? So what sort of things do we need to be doing to advance the knowledge? And then the second thing that you have to take care of is to make some considerations that are going to have an impact on the structure and the elaboration, the extent of elaboration that's going to be there within your literature review. So, for example, what's the level of the novelty, whether it's in terms of the context being studied or a particular theory that's being explored, and what is the current knowledge base in terms of empirics or the theoretical, is one stronger or weaker than the other, and how does that dynamic affect your own work? And also, what's the diversity of your audience? The more diverse your audience is, the more time you have to spend on unpacking concepts. Then after that, we can go on to discuss what a good literature review actually entails. And here you will have your key concepts clearly introduced and defined. And these definitions don't need to be formal. If, for example, you are dealing with an expert audience that's not that diverse, it also has to have synthesis. So taking your huge chunk of notes for the different articles that you have read, what are the different key messages that they have along your key concepts? And then how do you bring that together into a narrative that's ideally split according to the different concepts themselves? And then finally, make sure that you bring those key concepts together. So this is also a key part of the so what. What is it that actually your review tells us or reveals that we don't yet understand and need to understand better? And make sure that the review overall is critical. So it's more than just describing a particular situation, but it's poking holes in the extant knowledge, in the current knowledge that show some kind of future research directions. And finally, make sure that the structure is also one that helps people to cognitively process where you are going with a particular idea. So start small, break it down per concept or variable, or at least limited relationships, then leading to something that is bigger, that is part of the conceptual framework that you're going to explore. Another thing to add is make sure that your literature review stays within scope. As you read different articles and you compile your notes, you will find a lot of things that are interesting and they are important, but they're not necessarily always relevant for the topic that you have chosen to focus on. So it helps the readers if you do not unduly give them material that's not going to be relevant for later parts of your paper. And you also create expectations that you don't intend to meet. And this usually also creates a lot of misunderstanding with reviewers, or let's say the examiners who might have to look at your piece of work. So always make sure that you have a clear understanding of what's really relevant and in line with the questions that you explore, and what is important and interesting, but just out of scope, because you can always park it and use it for another project. These are my best quick tips in terms of doing a literature review, but if there's anything else that has worked for you in the past or that might be different for your unique field, please leave a comment so that we can all benefit from the knowledge that's out there.